For decades, he stood just behind the spotlight, watching, listening, and keeping it all to himself. As one of Elvis Presley's most trusted companions, James Burton witnessed moments the world never got to see. Now, at 85, the silence is finally breaking. The stories he's sharing aren't just memories, they are revelations that could reshape how you see Elvis forever. So, who was the man behind the legend? And what truths have been hidden all this time? Let's uncover it together. The self-taught prodigy of the Bayou. James Burton didn't pick up the guitar through any conventional method. There were no structured classes, no local music instructors, and no stacks of sheet music to guide his hands. Instead, James learned through a raw, innate connection, an instinct that relied entirely on feeling and sound, something that couldn't be taught or copied. From the second his fingers touched the strings, everything fell into place. Louisiana, the state that served as his backdrop, provided the perfect atmosphere for him to cultivate a truly unique sound. Born on August 21st, 1939, in the tiny town of Dubberly, Louisiana, James was the son of Guy and Lola Burton. His early years in the rural South were quiet and modest, a world away from the glitz of a professional stage. Yet, music was a constant presence, drifting out of local churches, echoing across the fields, and crackling through radio speakers on humid southern nights. James soaked up every note, and long before he ever stepped before an audience, music had already become his internal language. By the time he hit his teenage years, the guitar had become an extension of his own body. He would spend hours chasing the specific melodies ringing in his head, teaching himself complex techniques that professional musicians often took years to perfect. What truly separated him from his peers wasn't just his natural gift, but an obsessive devotion. He wasn't merely practicing to improve. He was playing because it was his only way of being. Soon the people around him began to pay attention. First his family, then the neighbors, and eventually a town that never expected to witness such a rare talent. In those tight-knit Louisiana communities, word of the boy from Dubberly traveled quickly. His playing was remarkably clean, filled with a confidence and emotional depth that seemed impossible for someone his age. It wasn't long before his reputation reached Shreveport, home to the Louisiana Hayride, one of the most influential music programs in the nation. Broadcast over radio station KWKH, the Hayride was famously known as the Cradle of the Stars, a launchpad where unknown performers could introduce themselves to the heart of America. Legends like Hank Williams and Johnny Cash had once stood on that stage, and a young singer from Mississippi named Elvis Presley had performed there just shortly before James arrived. James Burton didn't just earn a spot on that stage, he commanded it. Despite his youth, he played with the seasoned authority of a veteran, and the audience could sense something profound in his performance. This wasn't a teenager trying to show off. This was a young man who had already discovered his identity, using the guitar to show the world exactly who he was. His journey had officially begun, and the road ahead was leading him toward a destiny he could never have dreamed of. How did this quiet boy from the Louisiana countryside end up defining the sound for one of America's greatest teen idols? That legendary chapter began with a one-way ticket to Hollywood. The architect of the invisible sound. While most teenagers only fantasize about the glitz of Hollywood, James Burton lived it. Before he even reached the age of 18, he gathered his few belongings, left the familiar soil of Louisiana, and set his sights on Los Angeles. He carried nothing but his guitar, and that rare, steady confidence found only in those who truly understand their destiny. The right door swung open almost immediately. James crossed paths with Ricky Nelson, a television sensation whose fame was sweeping the nation. Nelson possessed the charm and the voice to make the world swoon, but he lacked a guitarist who could match his fire. James Burton stepped into that void. Though he began on rhythm, it was only a matter of time before he took over lead guitar, allowing his instinctive tone to finally take flight. Their collaboration kicked off with the hit, "Believe What You Say," a moment that helped solidify the rockabilly foundation of Ricky Nelson's career. For more than a decade, James acted as the hidden engine behind Nelson's greatest successes. While the fans fell for Ricky, the musicians were listening to James, recognizing a once-in-a-generation talent. Even before his years with Nelson had fully blossomed, James had already carved his name into history. In 1957, he composed the sharp, hypnotic guitar riff for Dale Hawkins' Susie Q. James had originally written the piece as a standalone instrumental, but Hawkins added lyrics, and in the shuffle of the industry, James never received the credit he deserved. There were no royalties and no official recognition for a riff that would eventually be hailed as one of the 500 songs that shaped the very foundation of rock and roll. It was a legendary piece of music, admired and covered by generations, while its creator remained a silent figure in the wings. It was a profound injustice to those who knew the reality, yet James didn't complain. He simply moved forward and continued to innovate because that was his nature. By the time the industry began to truly take notice, James Burton had spent years constructing a legacy from the shadows. His name wasn't always in lights, but his musical fingerprints were on everything. What followed would lead him deeper into the studios and onto the stages that defined the sound of an entire generation. The architect of the session and the King's Call. By the mid-1960s, James Burton had already achieved more than most guitarists could in a lifetime. He had anchored Ricky Nelson's stardom, birthed one of rock's most legendary riffs, and established a name that resonated far beyond the borders of Louisiana. Yet, James was never one to settle. He possessed a productive restlessness, always searching for the next musical frontier where his unique touch could elevate a song. In 1965, he became a fixture in the house band for the television phenomenon Shindig. This nationally broadcast program placed him before millions of viewers every week. It was a different kind of fame, not as a frontman, but as the unbreakable rhythmic foundation for every star who stepped to the mic. James mastered the delicate art of serving the song, knowing exactly how to enhance a melody without ever stealing the spotlight. As his time touring with Ricky Nelson wound down, his status as a session titan reached new heights. Los Angeles studios were constantly on the line, and the industry's biggest artists began requesting him by name. James became a core member of an elite, quiet circle of musicians who shaped the world's favorite records without needing their names on the cover or the roar of a crowd. If you were a serious musician, however, you knew exactly who was in the room when that signature sound played. His list of collaborators reads like a definitive history of American music. The Everly Brothers, Merle Haggard, Glenn Campbell, Johnny Cash, Emmylou Harris, and John Denver. He ignored genre boundaries entirely, drifting between country, folk, and rock with effortless grace. He contributed dobro to Buffalo Springfield in 1967 and left his mark on sessions for Elvis Costello, Graham Parsons, and Joni Mitchell. His career eventually earned him a place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2001, with Keith Richards delivering the induction. This was followed by the Rockabilly, Musicians, and Country Music Halls of Fame, the latter in 2024. Even Rolling Stone ranked him at number 24 on their list of the 250 greatest guitarists ever, a staggering feat for a self-taught kid from Dubberly. By the late 1960s, James was so in demand that he famously turned down a spot in Bob Dylan's first touring band, and even Elvis Presley's 1968 comeback special. But when 1969 arrived, Elvis reached out once more with an offer that was impossible to ignore: a residency in Las Vegas. This wasn't just a gig. Elvis tasked James with building the musical foundation from scratch. They formed the TCB Band, short for Taking Care of Business. As the band leader and musical anchor, James stood beside the king night after night. Whenever Elvis turned, grinned, and shouted the legendary cue, "Play it, James," Burton would unleash a solo that was as precise as it was fiery. He even introduced his famous pink Paisley Fender Telecaster during this era, a guitar Elvis loved instantly, and which became a visual icon of rock history. Their bond was built on deep mutual respect, a partnership that would soon take them from the neon lights of Vegas to the hearts of millions across the globe. The 8-year legend and the final curtain. From the very second the Las Vegas residency ignited in 1969, James Burton stepped into one of the most legendary eras in the history of live performance. Year after year, he traversed the map with Elvis Presley, performing in arenas that were perpetually overflowing. These weren't mere concerts, they were cultural phenomena that left fans in awe for a lifetime. James was the heartbeat of the operation. As the leader of the TCB Band, his responsibility went beyond the guitar. He was the musical glue, interpreting Elvis's spontaneous energy and ensuring every note landed with perfection. Elvis was a whirlwind on stage, electric and unpredictable, and James possessed the unique instinct to match his every move. Even amidst this grueling schedule, James continued to innovate, releasing his solo masterpiece, The Guitar Sounds of James Burton, in 1971. He also lent his brilliance to Emmylou Harris's Hot Band in 1975 and 76. But his loyalty to Elvis was absolute. No matter the opportunity, when the King called for a new tour, James returned to his side without a second thought. By the summer of 1977, the road had begun to look different. The man who had revolutionized Vegas in 1969 was fading. The toll of fame and health struggles had become undeniable, and James privately felt the tour should have been halted. Yet, Elvis's devotion to his fans was unshakable. On June 26, 1977, at Market Square Arena in Indianapolis, Indiana, they performed a show that no one knew would be the last. The atmosphere was ordinary. There were no grand farewells. Elvis gave the familiar cue, "Play it, James," and they delivered a final, fiery performance. When the show ended, the goodbyes were routine. Elvis headed to Graceland for a break, and James flew back to Shreveport, fully expecting to reunite in a few weeks. That reunion never happened. On August 16th, the news of Elvis's passing shattered the world, turning that ordinary night in Indianapolis into a sacred memory. The final chord and the final nod became a goodbye that nobody saw coming until it was already over. The silence at Graceland. On the morning of August 16th, 1977, Graceland appeared exactly as it always had, tranquil, shaded, and still. The Grand Memphis estate served as a private sanctuary for Elvis, operating on a unique rhythm far removed from the bustling world beyond its gates. Because Elvis typically lived during the night and slept through the day, those within his inner circle had long ago restructured their own lives to match his unconventional schedule. However, on this particular morning, the familiar routine was fractured. Rest eluded Elvis despite taking his usual medications. A lingering toothache, paired with the mounting physical struggles he had endured for years, turned the night into an agonizingly long ordeal. His long-standing battle with insomnia and a growing dependence on prescription drugs had become a grave worry for those closest to him. The performer who once possessed boundless vitality was now struggling just to navigate a single restless night. The early hours were spent quietly with his fiancée, Ginger Alden. They talked and read in the soft dimness of the mansion, sharing the kind of intimate, private moments that never grace a tabloid. Eventually, Elvis informed Ginger he was headed to the bathroom with a book to try and relax. She remained in the bedroom, expecting his return shortly. As the hours drifted by, a heavy silence filled the house. Around 1:30 in the afternoon, Ginger realized he had been away far too long. Upon checking, she discovered him face down on the bathroom floor, motionless. Her screams ignited immediate chaos throughout the household. An ambulance was summoned, and paramedics worked fervently to revive him as he was rushed to Baptist Memorial Hospital. Their efforts were in vain. At 3:30 in the afternoon, the world lost Elvis Presley. While the official cause was cardiac arrhythmia, it was widely recognized that his physical decline and years of pill dependency were major factors. He was only 42 years old. The news hit the globe like a thunderclap, extinguishing a light that many believed would shine forever. For James Burton, who had been both a loyal bandmate and a dear friend, the loss was devastating. Yet, amidst the sorrow, James held on to the memories of the man behind the myth. What truly defined the person he had known so well? Memories of a true friend. There are those who discuss Elvis Presley with a distant sense of awe, focusing on his status as a cultural icon, or the music that defined an era. James Burton, however, viewed him through a much more intimate lens. When James spoke of Elvis, he wasn't recounting the story of a myth. He was remembering a close friend. He was speaking of a man he had stood next to for hundreds of nights, someone who cared for his inner circle with the loyalty of a brother. James often described Elvis as a soul who was genuinely sweet, kind, and thoughtful, far away from the prying eyes of the media. Elvis made it a habit to check on the members of the TCB band, constantly asking about their families and ensuring that everything was stable in their personal lives. He wanted to know if anyone needed help, or if there was anything he could do to make their lives easier. This innate generosity translated to the stage as well. James observed that no matter how drained Elvis felt, or what personal burdens he was enduring, he stepped into the light and offered the audience his absolute best. There was a profound sincerity in every show. Elvis took it personally that the crowd should leave with smiles on their faces. He gave 100% every single evening, not out of obligation, but because it was a deep, personal necessity. Furthermore, James spoke with great warmth about the professional respect Elvis afforded his musicians. Instead of treating them as mere background players, Elvis trusted the instincts of the TCB band, granting them the creative liberty to interpret the music in ways that enhanced the final sound. Perhaps the most touching insight James shared was regarding gospel music. Although the Globe recognized him for rock and roll, gospel was the genre that truly stirred Elvis's heart. James was convinced that had Elvis lived longer, he would have eventually dedicated his entire career to gospel, as that was where his spirit truly resided. When Elvis sang those hymns, James noted that a visible transformation would come over him. To James Burton, Elvis was never just a title or a king. He was a deeply human, generous man who left an indelible mark on everyone he encountered. Though the world said goodbye on August 16th, for James, his friend never truly departed. The question remained, how would James carry that grief? And where would his legendary guitar lead him next? The eternal journey of a six-string legend. When the world lost Elvis Presley in August of 1977, James Burton felt a void that went far beyond professional ties. He hadn't just lost his bandleader, he had lost a brother-in-arms who had been a cornerstone of his life for almost 8 years. The TCB band, which had shared countless midnight flights and electric arena nights, suddenly found itself without its leader. While many would have retreated into silence to process such a heavy blow, James found his healing the only way he knew how, through the strings of his guitar. It wasn't long before John Denver reached out, sparking a creative bond that felt effortless from the start. Their work on the album I Want to Live revealed an immediate chemistry, and what started as a simple studio session blossomed into a massive new chapter. Reunited with former Elvis bandmates Glenn D. Hardin and Jerry Scheff, James found a new musical family. For the next 16 years, he served as lead guitarist for Denver, recording 12 albums and traveling the globe. He even brought along the icons of his past, his 1969 pink Paisley Fender Telecaster and his faithful dobro, using the tools that defined one era to shape the sound of another. The two reunited for a breathtaking wildlife concert in 1995, but tragedy struck again in 1997 when Denver was killed in a plane crash. Once more, James stood at a memorial service, this time in Aspen, Colorado, honoring a man who had helped him find his rhythm after Elvis. Throughout the 1980s and into the new millennium, James remained unstoppable. He collaborated with legends like Merle Haggard and Rodney Crowell, began a long-term partnership with Elvis Costello in 1986, and shone in the famous Roy Orbison and Friends special. From 1998 until 2013, he kept the King's flame alive through the Elvis, the concert tour, reuniting with old friends to bring that legendary sound to fresh ears. James Burton refused to be anchored by sorrow, choosing instead to let the music pull him toward the future. The accolades and milestones were still coming, and the story of his resilience was far from over. What did these final decades of triumph and global recognition truly look like? The King's silent compassion. Elvis Presley may have captivated the globe with his legendary voice and electric stage presence. Those in his inner circle understood that his most profound gift was something much quieter. It was a relentless, genuine kindness that he offered freely, almost always far from the reach of a camera lens or a newspaper headline. From the moment he tasted success, giving back became as natural to him as breathing. Elvis never sought publicity for his charity. He simply acted whenever he sensed a need. There were stories of him paying off the mortgages of complete strangers without ever revealing his identity. A man at a petrol station, struggling to pay for fuel, might suddenly find his bill covered and his groceries paid for, never realizing that the world's biggest star had just quietly changed his day. His philanthropic reach was as vast as his fame. In 1961, he performed a benefit concert in Hawaii to raise thousands of dollars for the USS Arizona Memorial. He even donated President Roosevelt's former yacht to generate funds for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Perhaps his most famous act of global giving was the 1973 Aloha from Hawaii special. Viewed by over 1 billion people, every cent of the proceeds went directly to the Kikili Cancer Fund. Closer to home, he maintained a tradition of sending $1,000 to 50 different Memphis charities every single Christmas, seeking no recognition whatsoever. He was known to purchase wheelchairs for people he had never met, fund life-saving surgeries for those in financial despair, and redirect the thousands of teddy bears sent by his fans to children's hospitals so that sick children would have something to hold on to. After he passed away in 1977, his family carried this torch forward through the Elvis Presley Charitable Foundation, which still supports the arts, education, and Presley Place, a shelter in Memphis dedicated to helping homeless families find their footing again. Elvis was crowned the king of rock and roll by the world, but to those who felt his quiet generosity, he was simply a man with a heart of gold. If you enjoyed this story of music and memory, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.